Security headlines.
FAA system failure delays flights nationwide. LastPass hit with lawsuit over an August breach, and trying to write malware with ChatGPT. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Shaun Marion, the CISO at McDonald. Shaun, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. And I would preface that with probably more opinions than expertise.
I'm going to demand actually expertise on the show. Full disclosure. Before we move on, of course, we have to thank our sponsor, App Omni, inventory and secure third-party apps to keep your SaaS data safe. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. To do so, just go to CISOSeries.com, hit the events dropdown, and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. It's the third one down. Click on it to join us, or you could subscribe to the CISO series on YouTube, and you would just see it in your YouTube subscriptions. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's get to it. First one here, the FAA system failure delays flights. Big story this week. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration posted an advisory warning that its United States Notice to Air Mission System, or NOTAM, failed, resulting in estimated flight delays and cancellations that impacted hundreds, if not thousands, overall flights. The administration ordered airlines to pause all domestic departures until 9 a.m. Eastern early in the morning on January 11th in order to validate the integrity of flight and safety information. You know, Shaun, the White House press secretary said there is no evidence of a cyber attack at this point. We're starting to see some signs perhaps that this was human error. Mandiant VP John Holtquist said the failure likely came from cascading failures across increasingly complex interdependent system. Does, I guess, this not appear to be a cyber attack still demonstrates the kind of the house of cards that so much infrastructure is based on. I always think of that XKCD form about, software dependencies being maintained by like one maintainer that lives out in like the middle of nowhere in Nevada. But I feel like a lot of critical infrastructure is in a similar situation, just kind of the nature of massive interconnectedness for many different systems. I'm curious, what went through your mind when you saw the story unfold?
Probably the same thing that went through a lot of people's mind of, oh, this is an attack. I think every time we see something now, that's kind of the first knee jerk. Based on what I've read, I agree it's just a system failure, but I do think it points out a significant problem that we already know about, which is aging infrastructure. I mean, whether it's critical infrastructure in this case, or even infrastructure at your business, we all deal with it. I feel like this is one of those things, though, not this specific incident, but the aging infrastructure and the lack of resiliency in the system. This is one of those things in 10 years, whenever it is that something hits, we're going to look back and go, it was totally preventable. We should have acted sooner, but we just haven't.
Yeah, and especially the way this system is designed to get information about payloads and passengers that can't be transferred through other means. And I have to think there has to be some way to maybe to shorten that pipeline. I realize like a lot of these systems are in place for very good reasons, a lot of it for redundancy. And I guess I would rather them ground everything when that information is not available, given the high stakes of traveling on a plane. But yeah, it seems like this is a call for modernization, maybe not just on the systems backend, but also kind of the process part of this as well, too, right?
Yeah, I feel like there is such an interconnected, we all know this, an interconnected mix of dependencies. So I'm sure the FAA is relying on various other means in the back end, various those suppliers, go through your list of connected groups and technologies and whatnot, and they all have their weaknesses. It's what I found interesting about this was, if I understand what I've read this far, it wasn't a big issue, at least from what caused the problem. Certainly cascaded into a significant issue for the industry. But if you think back to that one little, what I understand to be a file that went corrupt, causing this cascading issue. If it's just that, think of what else is out there just waiting for that one little thing to happen, to have that cascading effect and cause, fill in the blank issues that, again, like it's totally preventable. It's totally preventable, but we've got to take the actions now, and they're not fun, but they're doable. It's just hard work.
Next up here, LastPass hit with lawsuit over August breach. A lawsuit has been filed by an unnamed individual who said LastPass's failures led to the theft of an unspecified amount of Bitcoin private keys stored in a wallet. The suit is seeking a jury trial to squeeze damages and restitution out of LastPass for a nationwide class that includes any LastPass users who had data stolen in the breach. In December, LastPass admitted that the attacks that it's experienced were more serious than first suspected, with attackers gaining access to cloud storage systems to steal user password vaults. Those vaults were encrypted. LastPass doesn't have those keys, but it's led to a whole kerfuffle regarding how LastPass is operating. I'm curious, Shaun, cybersecurity specialists such as yourself struggle to get people to use password management software. So this breach may have done a lot more damage, I guess, to that concept more than just to LastPass customers in general. How do you give comfort to your employees and vendors in the face of such a, I guess I told you so moment?
Yeah, I still don't see it as an "I told you so" moment. Although every time I go speak to groups and we talk, I ask like, "What can we do in our personal life?" I always tell them, "Wherever you can, use multi-factor, use a password manager, use long passwords." And the question always comes up. Well, what happens if the password manager gets breached? And lo and behold, here we go. I have the same feedback. My stance hasn't changed. Everybody uses a password manager. Every single person uses a password manager. The difference is mine, and I'm a LastPass customer. Mine is in LastPass. I know where every single one of my passwords is, and I have gone through and changed all of them. If you aren't using technology, your password manager is your head. And I doubt you know where every single password is used. So you go change a couple of them, but what are the chances that if somebody gets your password, they can get into any other service that you forgot about? Because we all know you either have a password that you reuse or probably a couple that are variations of that password that you've forgotten long since. So I tell them, yeah, it was a pain. I had over 300 passwords I had to change. I mean, that was not easy. Took my wife and I like 20 hours between us. It was a pain, but we did it. And you know what? I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm still a LastPass customer.
I am kind of in the same boat and still in the process of updating everything. My standing advice is always just go to Have I Been Pwned, search your email, look through literally the paste bin that has your password in it. And if you are using that password anywhere, it's just a matter of plugging that into an
Yep.
algorithm before that
Yep.
that goes down. So, yeah, a really good perspective. Appreciate that. Next up here, trying to write malware with Chat GPT. It's already known that OpenAI's Chat GPT text engine can theoretically write malware. It's having trouble with syntax right now, but it'll get there, I'm sure. Security researchers at Checkpoint report dark web hacking forums are experimenting using Chat GPT to help facilitate and support malicious attacks. The researchers say this could open the door for actors with very low levels of technical knowledge to launch attacks or make sophisticated cyber operations much more efficient and easier. In fact, headline this entire was ChatGPT written in. Maybe just the last part. We know that cybercrime groups are really good at exploiting vulnerabilities, taking advantage of innovation, as well as the inevitable delay that organizations experience as they struggle to understand the threat. In your mind, Shaun, is ChatGPT as dangerous as it appears?
Yeah, totally. But I'm a big fan of it. So as much as I think it's dangerous, I think it's evolution, and we have to evolve. And I was thinking about this as I was, going through. It was first coming out, and I was kind of digging into it, asking it. It's probably like we all did that used it, some basic questions. I was blown away by how realistic the responses are. And of course, any technology, there's going to be a way to use it nefariously. But that's okay. That's life, right? If I was thinking, if you think back to like just kinetic wars, like weaponry and so forth, go back to like the Greeks and using slingshots and bows and arrows, and we've all progressed for better or worse. In many cases, worse, but we have at least the technologies progressed. Today's technology is no different. There's going to be technologies come out that are going to be huge benefits, but are going to have negative side effects. And I used to do corporate investigations, and my mentor always told me, follow the money. Doesn't matter what it is, just follow the money. And I think about this and think, a new technology comes out, we're going to have nefarious actors who are going to try to use that for financial gain, whatever it is. Doesn't mean I'm going to shy away from it. So I think it could be used for some really gnarly stuff, but I'm still a huge fan of it. I think it's ridiculously cool technology that'll probably have more benefit than negative.
Next up here, Russian Turla hackers hijacked decade-old malware infrastructure to deploy new backdoors. The Russian cyber espionage group known as Turla has been observed piggybacking on attack infrastructure used by a decade-old malware to deliver its own reconnaissance and backdoor tools to targets in Ukraine. Mandiant said the hijacked servers correspond to a variant of a commodity malware called Andromeda that was uploaded to Virus Total back in 2013. It's kind of a double headache of cybersecurity here, Shaun, not just dealing with new and shiny malware, but Also, staying aware of legacy technology that can be lurking anywhere in the stack. I'm curious, what advice do you share with your colleagues about keeping pace with the past as well as the present?
Yeah, when I meet with my colleagues and you just drop the term technical debt, like all of them cringe because all of us deal with it, everybody. And I know there's probably some out there. Maybe you're at some startup that just started 2 weeks ago and you have no technical debt, and that's awesome. But the truth is, most of us deal with it. And I think the advice I give them, and I should preface, I don't have this solved. But I am working on it. The advice I give him is sit down with the key leaders to talk about what is the business driver that keeps us from removing this technology. And in some instances, there are legit business drivers. It's an old system that, for whatever reason, they can't get rid of. There's plans to, or it could be cost, or whatever the case is. I always tell them understand the business driver, remove or replace what you can, and then ideally deal with what's left. And that could be through isolation, advanced monitoring, whatever the case is that's specific to that piece of aging infrastructure. But the worst thing they can do is just throw up their hands and get all angry. Well, they won't get rid of this. They don't understand. And I say, spin that, go understand them, understand why, and see what can be done and what can't. That's where you use your expertise to apply the right controls to protect that infrastructure.
I absolutely love that because so much I used to work in with enterprise IT kind of communications company, and so much of what we were talking about was IT realizing that they are part of the business, they are not standing in opposition to it, and like everybody, like they have to work to serve the business, not just
Mm.
not just create these crystal palaces and that kind of stuff. So
Right.
I love that take of kind of everybody. Hey, we're working toward the same thing, right? We want the business to be successful. I love that.
Amen.
All right. Before we move on, we have to spend a few moments to thank our sponsor, App Omni. Can you name all the third-party apps connected to your major SaaS platforms like Salesforce and Microsoft? What about the data these apps can access? After all, one compromised third-party app could put your entire SaaS ecosystem at risk. With App Omni, you get visibility to all third-party apps and SaaS to SaaS connections, including which end users have enabled them and the level of data access they've been granted. Visit appomni.com to request a free risk assessment. Amazon S3 will now encrypt all new data with AES 256 by default. Amazon's simple storage service, known as S3 in the biz, will now automatically encrypt all new objects added on buckets on the server side using AES 256 by default. While the server side encryption system has been available on AWS for well over a decade now, the tech giant has enabled it by default to bolster security. Admins will not have to take any action for the new encryption system to affect their buckets, and Amazon promises it won't have any negative performance impact. Sean, here on Cybersecurity Headlines, we regularly cover stories in which code or data gets purloined because of opened or the dreaded misconfigured bucket on AWS, GitHub, just picking on the two big names there. But do you feel that this is a good development? Do you see any downside to this, I guess?
I do see downside, but I should say that overall, I applaud this. I think that anytime they can get security controls built in by default, that's the right way to go. I think back to, remember, we used to get you buy a new Wi-Fi router and it came with no password. Admin was the admin credentials. It was just horrible practices, right? So anything we can do to get security built in by default, huge fan of. Where I think that the downside of this is I don't want people to see this as a safety blanket. Like, okay, I don't have to do anything in addition. And the issue with that is that we still have issues with poor passwords or exposed passwords, or keys that get exposed that completely bypass the encryption. They give access to the data itself. So yes, it's a great move and I love it, but that doesn't remove the responsibilities of the ownership of system admins, developers, and so forth to protect their credentials, make sure they're using like basic security, like least privilege, all those types of things. And my fear is that some of them, not all, but some will be like, we don't have to worry about that so much. Hey, it's encrypted by default. No bad guys can get access to it. And that's just not true.
Next up here, government watchdog cracks federal agencies' passwords. The Office of the Inspector General has published a scathing rebuke of security practices employed by the Department of the Interior, which manages the country's federal land, national parks, and multi-billion-dollar budget. After the department claimed that it would require more than 100 years to recover its password using off-the-shelf password cracking software, the OIG used a rig costing just under $15,000 to crack nearly 14,000 employee passwords accounting for about 16% within 90 minutes. The OIG also found that some critical systems and user accounts failed to comply with the government's own two-factor authentication mandate. The report concluded that poor password practices put the department at risk of a breach that could pose a, quote, high probability of massive disruption to its operations. The Department of the Interior agreed with most of the OIG's findings and said it's committed to improving its cybersecurity defenses. We've already talked about it, but definitely technical debt seems to be running through a lot of this week's stories. It's easy to suggest that most government departments are both huge and underfunded, but how can we realistically close what can only be thought of as gaping holes in the security's overall security?
Yeah, I kind of chuckle when I read this because I thought, pick your entity, the Department of Interior, some company, whatever. I guarantee you they're going to find similar issues, at least if they have any kind of size and any kind of age. What can be done? I don't see this again. This is not a complex problem. It's hard. It is hard work, but it's not complex. If we could just get them to do some basic things, them being industry wide, vulnerability management, in this case, not just password policy, but password implementation and control. You're still going to have legacy systems. I don't know the inner workings of the Department of Interior. I'm going to guess they have some old systems that maybe can't even function with more complex passwords. I know I've ran into that. So, I think if we go back to what we talked about earlier with technical debt, with resiliency, really focusing on what matters most. Were these 14? I make all this up, but these 14,000 passwords, were they low level system accounts that nobody cared about? Probably not, but maybe I think prioritize those. I think overall, they're looking at Department of Interior, but how many third parties do they connect to? How many mom and pop shops do they rely on that don't have good control? So again, I think we all know what needs to be done here, at least holistically. It's just it's expensive and it's hard. It is a lot of hard work. But the old saying, when's the best time to plant a tree, right? 30 years ago and today. So get started.
All right, next up here, Trojan Puzzle trains AI assistants to suggest malicious code. Researchers have devised a new poisoning attack dubbed Trojan Puzzle that trains AI models to learn how to reproduce dangerous payloads. The researchers poisoned an AI training dataset of nearly 6 gigabytes of Python code, which mimics datasets that AI models pull right from the internet. Trojan Puzzle avoids detection by actively hiding parts of its malicious payload during the training process. The attack relies on the ML to substitute random words until it finally suggests the entire attacker-chosen payload code. Here's another example of artificial intelligence pushed into attack mode by quite a creative way, kind of taking advantage of the fact that these systems don't necessarily know what they are saying in a lot of ways, and kind of gaming that. It seems that much of cybersecurity is tasked with chasing down vulnerabilities, kind of a classic, always described as a cat and mouse game, but we seldom ever seem to get the chance to become truly proactive because of all of the variables. Shaun, do you see a time when that might change?
No. I don't want to sound too defeatist. I think it'll change, but will it get better? I don't know. I think my point earlier is, as you get, one side of this fight, you get the offense that improves, you're going to get the defense that improves too, and this continues. It's again, back to the point of kinetic warfare. It hasn't changed in thousands of years. I don't think that technology will change the playing field, but I don't think it's going to get any better. I think it's going to get worse, but I do think we're going to get a lot of good things out of it, just as there are bad, and we'll continue to grow and learn and all these things. Again, back to Chat GPT, like, I'm still a huge fan of AI. It's going to have a number of unintended consequences, in some cases maybe intended, that are scary and they're unknown. And hackers, and I hate the term hackers, I shouldn't use that. I like actors, nefarious actors, are going to use it for bad. There's just no doubt, and they're going to use it at scale, but we're going to do a whole bunch of other cool things too. So that's why I love the industry. For better or worse, I think I'll continue to have a job for some time, and I would rather I didn't need it for this purpose, but I do. And I think it'll keep us busy, at least as far as I can see, for the rest of my career.
Well, and we have Harry on YouTube who just commented that, he kind of posed the question, do you think ChatGPT will ever be used to create secure code? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's an intriguing possibility. I know Microsoft's investing a ton of money into the space, so I wouldn't be surprised given their security bona fides for sure.
Agree.
And last up here, lawsuit claims student loan site inflated membership to entice acquisition. JP Morgan Chase is suing the 30-year-old founder of Frank, a fintech startup it acquired for $175 million for allegedly lying about its scale and success by creating an enormous list of fake users to entice the financial giant to buy it. Frank offers software aimed at improving the student loan application process for young Americans seeking financial aid. The interesting part here where this comes into our purview, the lawsuit claims that the CEO, Charlie Javis, allegedly created a roster of fake customers using PII of 4.2 million students who did not actually exist. Shaun, in a way, this story appears to be a low-level fraud case, but it could be easy to see it that this is one of the many ways breach data could be used, especially when people shrug their shoulders at yet another breach. We see these 100 million people PII exposed, and it's just like, okay, it's Tuesday. Do you have any thoughts? I'm curious about this story.
Yeah, I was actually surprised he used fake data and didn't just go, purchase 4.7 million, at least, real data. But I think it's relevant back to the chat GPT and the AI discussion because we're talking about this ridiculously advanced technology can be used for nefarious purposes. And we get some dude that sells a business to JP Morgan for hundreds of millions of dollars. And he basically just lied with fake data, like so low level. So, back to your question earlier, will this problem ever get solved? And this is proof point. No, I don't think it will because technology may advance. But in this case, he didn't need a whole bunch of tech to make a whole bunch of money. So I think JP Morgan maybe could have done just a little more due diligence, but I have the benefit of hindsight here. Maybe I would have missed it too. I probably would have. But, I just think technology is going to advance and these types of things are going to continue to exist. And we got to continue to find ways to root them out.
All right. Well, Shaun, before we get out of here, any story that you reacted strongly to today, a thumbs up or an eye roller that just kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, my eyes, I think, literally did roll as part of the LastPass discussion because I knew the conversations that are coming. That's going, I told you, and I'm like, yeah, you told me, but you know what? You're still wrong. LastPass is still better than this. Dashlane, go pick your tool of choice, but it's still better than this or the second alternative, writing it down.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, where can people find you on the cyberspace if they're so inclined?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I dropped all social media years ago, besides LinkedIn and some other personal things, but that's where you can find me. I try to be active there as much as I can.
We will have that in the show notes for sure. Well, thank you so much, Shaun Marion, the CISO at McDonald's. Just truly amazing, great takes, and we'll have to have you on again real soon.
Appreciate it. Great to connect.
All right. Well, before we get out here, we also want to thank our sponsor, App Omni, inventory and secure third-party apps to keep your SaaS data safe. A reminder to join us next week for Super Cyber Friday. Our topic of discussion will be hacking automated security, an hour of critical thinking of how intelligent automation can achieve more without doing more. That'll be followed by our Week in Review show. And in the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us about 6 minutes and we'll get you all caught up. You can also subscribe to the show through our newsletter on LinkedIn. There you can read and hear the show right from your inbox. Just go to CISO Series page on LinkedIn to subscribe. I'm Rich Stroffolino using ChatGPT to remind you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.